Second Chance Ministry Radio proudly presents Christmas Stories from the Heart. Enjoy and have a glorious day.
It's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. The Legend of the Christmas Apple by Ruth Sawyer, from This Way to Christmas. Once upon a time there lived in Germany a little clockmaker by the name of Hermann Joseph. He lived in one little room with a bench for his work, and a chest for his wood, and his tools, and a cupboard for his dishes, and a trundle bed under the bench. Besides these, there was a stool, and that was all, excepting the clocks. There were hundreds of clocks, little and big, carved and plain, some with wooden faces and some with porcelain ones, shelf clocks, cuckoo clocks, clocks with chimes and clocks without, and they all hung on the walls, covering them quite up. In front of his one little window there was a little shelf, and on this Hermann put all his best clocks to show the passers-by. Often they would stop and look, and someone would cry, "See, Hermann Joseph has made a new clock. It's finer than any of the rest." Then, if it happened that anybody was wanting a clock, he would come in and buy it. I said Hermann was a little clockmaker. That was because his back was bent and his legs were crooked, which made him very short and funny to look at. But there was no kinder face than his in all the city, and the children loved him. Whenever a toy was broken or a doll lost an arm or a leg or an eye, its careless Mutterchen would carry it straight to Hermann's little shop. "The Kindlein needs mending," she would say. "Canst thou do it now for me?" And whatever work Hermann was doing, he would always put it aside to mend the broken toy or doll, and never a pfennig would he take for the mending. "Go spend it for sweetmeats, or better still, put it by till Christmas time. 'Twill get thee some happiness then, maybe," he would always say. Now it was the custom in that long ago for those who lived in the city to bring gifts to the great cathedral on Christmas and lay them before the Holy Mother and Child. People saved all through the year that they might have something wonderful to bring on that day. And there was a saying among them that when a gift was brought that pleased the Christ child more than any other, he would reach down from Mary's arms and take it. This was but a saying, of course. The old Herr Graf, the oldest man in the city, could not remember that it had ever really happened, and many there were who laughed at the very idea. But children often talked about it, and the poets made beautiful verses about it. And often when a rich gift was placed beside the altar, the watchers would whisper among themselves, "Perhaps now we shall see a miracle." Those who had no gifts to bring went to the cathedral just the same on Christmas Eve to see the gifts of the others and hear the carols and watch the burning of the waxen tapers. The little clockmaker was one of these. Often he was stopped and someone would ask, "How happens it that you never bring a gift?" Once the bishop himself questioned, "Poorer than thou have brought offerings to the child. Where is thy gift?" Then it was that Hermann had answered, "Wait, some day you shall see. I, too, shall bring a gift some day." The truth of it was that the little clockmaker was so busy giving what he had all through the year that there was never anything left at Christmas time. But he had a wonderful idea on which he was working every minute that he could spare time from his clocks. It had taken him years and years. No one knew anything about it but Trudy, his neighbor's child, and Trudy had grown from a baby into a little house mother, and still the gift was not finished. It was a clock, the most wonderful and beautiful clock ever made, and every part of it had been fashioned with loving care. He had spent years carving the case and the hands, years perfecting the works, and now Hermann saw that with a little more haste and time he could finish it for the coming Christmas. He mended the children's toys as before, but he gave up making his regular clocks, so there were fewer to sell, and often his cupboard was empty, and he went supperless to bed. But that only made him a little thinner, and his face a little kinder, and meantime the gift clock became more and more beautiful. It was fashioned after a rude stable with rafters, stall, and crib. The Holy Mother knelt beside the manger in which a tiny Christ-child lay, while through the open door the others came. 3 were kings, and 3 were shepherds, and 3 were soldiers, and 3 were angels. And when the hours struck, the figure knelt in adoration before the sleeping child, while the silver chimes played the Magnificat. "Thou seest," said the clockmaker to Trudy, "it is not just on Sundays and holidays that we should remember to worship the Christkindlein and bring him gifts, but every day, every hour." The days went by like clouds scudding before a winter wind, and the clock was finished at last. So happy was Herman with his work that he put the gift clock on the shelf before the little window to show the passers-by. There were crowds looking at it all day long, and many would whisper, "Do you think this can be the gift Herman had spoken of, his offering on Christmas Eve to the church?" The day before Christmas came. Herman cleaned up his little shop, wound all his clocks, brushed his clothes, and then went over the gift clock again to be sure everything was perfect. "It will not look meanly beside the other gifts," he thought happily. In fact, he was so happy that he gave away all but 1 pfennig to the blind beggar who passed his door, and then, remembering that he had eaten nothing since breakfast, he spent that last pfennig for a Christmas apple to eat with a crust of bread he'd made. These he was putting by on the cupboard to eat after he was dressed, when the door opened and Trudy was standing there, crying softly. "Kindlein, Kindlein, what ails thee?" And he gathered her into his arms. "'Tis father. He is hurt, and all the money that was put by for the tree and sweets and toys has gone to Herr Doctor. And now how can I tell the children? Already they have lighted the candle at the window and are waiting for Kris Kringle to come." The little clockmaker laughed merrily. "Come, come, little one, all will be well. Herman will sell a clock for thee. Some house in the city must need a clock. And in a wink we shall have money enough for the tree and the toys. Go home and sing." He buttoned on his great coat, and picking out the best of the old clocks, he went out. He went first to the rich merchants, but their houses were full of clocks. Then to the journeyman, but they said his clock was old-fashioned. He even stood on the corner of the streets and in the square, crying, "A clock, a good clock for sale." But no one paid any attention to him. At last he gathered up his courage and went to the Herr Graf himself. "Will your Excellency buy a clock?" he said, trembling at his own boldness. "I would not ask, but it is Christmas, and I am needing to buy happiness for some children." Then Herr Graf smiled. "Yes, I will buy a clock, but not that one. I will pay 1,000 gulden for the clock thou hast had in thy window these 4 days past." "But, your Excellency, that is impossible." And poor Herman trembled harder than ever. "Pooh! Nothing is impossible, that clock or none. Get thee home, and I will send for it in a half an hour, and pay thee the gulden." The little clockmaker stumbled out. "Anything but that, anything but that," he kept mumbling over and over to himself on his way home. But as he passed the neighbor's house, he saw the children at the window with their lighted candles, and he heard Trudy singing. And so it happened that the servant who came from the Herr Graf carried the gift clock away with him. But the clockmaker would take but 5 of the 1,000 gulden in payment to give to Trudy. And as the servant disappeared up the street, the chimes commenced to ring from the great cathedral, and the street suddenly became noisy with the many people going thither bearing their Christmas offerings. "I have gone empty-handed before," said the little clockmaker sadly. "I can go empty-handed once again." As he turned to shut his cupboard door behind him, his eyes fell on the Christmas apple, and an odd little smile crept into the corners of his mouth and lighted his eyes. "It is all I have, my dinner for 2 days. I will carry that to the Christ-child. It is better, after all, than going empty-handed." How full of peace and beauty was the great cathedral when Hermann entered it. There were 1,000 tapers burning, and everywhere the sweet scent of the Christmas greens, and the laden altar before the Holy Mother and Child. There were richer gifts than had been brought for many years, marvelously wrought vessels from the greatest silversmiths, cloth of gold and cloth of silk brought from the East by the merchants. Poets had brought their songs illuminated on rolls of heavy parchment. Painters had brought their pictures of saints and the Holy Family. Even the king himself had brought his crown and scepter to lay before the child. And after all these offerings came the little clockmaker, walking slowly down the long, dim aisle, holding tight to his Christmas apple. The people saw him, and a murmur rose, hummed a moment indistinctly through the church, and then grew clear and articulate. "Shame! See, he's too mean to bring his clock. He hoards it as a miser hoards his gold. See what he brings. Shame!" The words reached Hermann, but he stumbled on. His head dropped forward nearly to his breast, his hands groping the way. The distance seemed interminable for his little bent body. Now he knew he was past the seats. Now his feet touched the first step, and there were 7 to climb to the altar. Would his feet never reach the top? 1, 2, 3, he counted to himself. 4, 5, 6. He was nearly there. There was but 1 more. The murmur of shame died away, and in its place rose one of wonder and awe. Soon the words became intelligible. "The miracle! It is the miracle!" The people knelt in the big cathedral. The bishop raised his hands in prayer, and the little clockmaker, stumbling on the last step, looked up through dim eyes and saw the child leaning toward him, far down from Mary's arms, with hands outstretched to take his gift. The Legend of the First Christmas Tree by Joni Eareckson Tada from A Christmas Longing. On a clear Christmas Eve night, Martin Luther was walking home through the forest. Beyond the crisp, fragrant branches of the evergreens, he could see the twinkle of 1,000 stars. The branches appeared to Luther as though they were wearing stars on their fingers. It must have been a beautiful sight, and on this special night it was an experience of God's splendor that he wanted to share with his family. He cut a small fir tree and carried it back to his home. As his children watched in wonder, Luther lighted candles as stars and placed them on the little tree's branches. The family must have stood together that night around the little tree and sung hymns of wonder to their Lord. Though we do not know if this was really the first Christmas tree, down through the ages Christians have carried on this tradition. For many, the evergreen tree, in Latin the lignum vitae, or tree of life, represents many wonderful truths from Scripture. Its green and lively branches are a vivid symbol of resurrection during a cold and barren season. The Christmas Guest, adapted from How the Great Guest Came by Edwin Markham. It happened one day near December's end, 2 neighbors called on an old-time friend, and they found his shop so meager and poor, made bright with boughs from ceiling to floor, and Conrad was sitting with face ashine when he suddenly stopped as he stitched a twine and said, "Old friends, at dawn today when the cock was crowing the night away, the Lord appeared in a dream to me and said, 'I'm coming your guest to be.' So I've been busy with feet astir, strewing my shop with branches of fir. The table is spread and the kettle is shined, and over the rafters the holly is twined. And now I will wait for my Lord to appear and listen closely, so I will hear his step as he nears my humble place. Then I'll open the door and look on his face." So his friends went home and left Conrad alone, for this was the happiest day he had known. For long since his family had passed away, and Conrad had spent many a sad Christmas day. But he knew with the Lord as his great guest, this Christmas would be the dearest and best. So he listened with only joy in his heart, and with every sound he would rise with a start and look for the Lord to be at his door, like the dream he'd had a few hours before. So he ran to the window after hearing a sound, but all he could see on the snow-covered ground was a shabby beggar whose shoes were torn, and all of his clothes were ragged and worn. But Conrad was touched and went to the door, and he said, "Your feet must be frozen and sore. I have some shoes in my shop for you, and a coat that will keep you warmer too." So with grateful heart the man went away, but Conrad noticed the time of day. He wondered what made the dear Lord so late and how much longer he'd have to wait. Then he heard a knock and ran to the door, but it was only a stranger once more, a bent old lady with a shawl of black and a bundle of kindling piled on her back. She asked for only a place to rest, but that was reserved for Conrad's great guest. Yet her voice seemed to plead, "Don't send me away. Let me rest for a while on this Christmas day." So Conrad brewed her a steaming cup and told her to sit at the table and sup. But after she left, he was filled with dismay, for he saw that the hours were slipping away, and the Lord had not come as he said he would, and Conrad felt sure he had misunderstood. When out of the stillness he heard a cry, "Please help me and tell me where am I?" So again he opened his friendly door and stood disappointed as twice before. It was only a child who had wandered away and was lost from her family on Christmas Day. Again, Conrad's heart was heavy and sad, but he knew he could make this little girl glad. So he called her in and wiped her tears and quieted all her childish fears. Then he led her back to her home once more, but as he entered his own darkened door, he knew that the Lord was not coming today, for the hours of Christmas had passed away. So he went to his room and knelt down to pray. And Conrad asked, "Lord, why did you delay? What kept you from coming to call on me? For I wanted so much your face to see." Then soft in the silence a voice he heard, "Lift up your head, for I kept my word. 3 times my shadow crossed your floor, 3 times I came to your lowly door. For I was the beggar with bruised cold feet, I was the woman you gave something to eat, and I was the child on the homeless street. 3 times I knocked, 3 times I came in, and each time I found the warmth of a friend. Of all the gifts, love is the best. I was honored to be your Christmas guest."
You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio.